I'm Grace, 38 years old, and my life felt quiet. Too quiet. Then came the night I crept downstairs for water in our Willow Creek home. I heard James's voice slithering from the study. "Fine. Tomorrow I'll kick her out of the house," he said. 10 years of marriage shattered right there on the cold floor. I thought I knew him. I didn't know a thing. Later, I found a receipt in his coat pocket. Dinner for two at the Riverside Inn, paid with my money. It got worse. He wasn't just sneaking around with Sophie. He was stealing. Stashing secrets in offshore accounts. He thought I'd stay blind and broken at 38 after giving him my best years. I didn't scream, didn't cry, not yet. Emily and Noah needed me. A fire sparked inside, sharp and fierce. What followed was a fight I never expected. Courtrooms, lies, a chance to corner him. Now I've got a gallery card in my pocket. That's the twist he'll never see coming. My story's raw, full of fights and tears. I faced his lies with nothing but my own 2 hands. Want to know how I took his betrayal and built a new life from it? Stay with me. This tale's worth hearing. Sleep wouldn't come that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of our Willow Creek home, the silence buzzing in my ears. The clock by my bedside blinked 2:10 a.m. My throat felt like sandpaper, so I slid out from the sheets, bare feet brushing the hardwood as I moved downstairs. The house groaned around me, old beams settling in the dark. In the kitchen, I fumbled for a glass, the faint hum of the fridge filling the quiet. Then it happened. A voice slipped through the stillness from the study. James' voice, low and jagged, carved the air. "Fine. Tomorrow I'll kick her out of the house," he said. I froze, the glass trembling in my grip. Those words didn't just hit me. They broke me open, a crack splitting through 10 years of marriage, silent and final, like a thread snapping under too much strain. My chest seized, air trapped in a vice. I wanted to scream, to charge in and demand who he was talking to, but my legs turned to stone. The cold floor pressed up through my soles, sharp and real, grounding me as my mind reeled. I saw flashes of our life together. Nights I'd sat alone, picking at cold dinners he'd promised to share. His clipped answers when I asked about work. The distance growing between us, a slow frost I'd tried to ignore. This wasn't a sudden blow. It was a truth I'd refused to face, rising now like floodwater through a cracked dam. Who was on that call? Sophie, with her easy smile and late-night texts he'd brushed off as nothing? My pulse hammered, each beat a question I couldn't answer. I set the glass down, the clink loud in the hush. I couldn't face him yet. Not like this, raw and unready. Instead, I climbed the stairs, drawn to the kids' rooms like a moth to flame. Emily slept curled into herself, her dark curls a wild crown against the pillow, moonlight tracing her soft cheeks. Noah sprawled loose, his toy plane tucked against his chest, breath steady as a metronome. I knelt by Emily's bed, smoothed her hair with shaky fingers. I leaned over Noah, pressed my lips to his forehead, tasting salt and warmth. They were my anchor, my reason. Whatever James planned, he wouldn't rip them from me. My throat tightened, but no tears came. Not yet. I needed them safe more than I needed to fall apart. Downstairs again, I passed his coat on the rack. A corner of paper poked out, catching my eye. I reached for it, heart thudding louder than my steps. The receipt unfolded in my hands, edges worn like it had been carried too long. Dinner for two at the Riverside Inn, last Tuesday. Steak and wine, a 120-year tab with my money. Our savings, scraped from years of my quiet sacrifices, poured into a night I wasn't part of. My fingers clenched the paper, the weight of it heavier than it should have been, a brick of truth pressing into my palm. I pictured him there, laughing with her, while I'd been home, folding laundry, believing his lies. Something snapped awake inside me, not just pain, but a fire, small and fierce, licking at the edges of my shock. I whispered to the empty room. Not yet, but soon. My voice sounded foreign, tight and honed, like a string pulled taut before it sings. I drifted to the kitchen table. the receipt still clutched in my fist. Dawn crept through the blinds, thin streaks of gray spilling across the wood. I grabbed a notebook from the counter, its pages wrinkled from grocery lists and school notes. Now it felt like a weapon. I flipped it open, pen scratching fast across the lines. Words tumbled out, rough and unformed. A plan, maybe. A way to fight back. I didn't know what yet, but I'd figure it out. My eyes stung, dry as dust, refusing to soften with tears. Crying would have been easy, a release I couldn't afford. Not when Emily and Noah slept upstairs. Not when James thought he could erase me by morning. I leaned back, the chair creaking under me. 10 years played out in my head. I'd been Grace the wife, Grace the mom, Grace who kept the wheels turning. I'd buried my own spark, packed away my paintbrushes when he'd scoffed at them, called them a waste. Art school faded into diaper runs and late-night bills. He'd wanted me dimmer, a shadow to prop him up. I'd let him reshape me, handed him the tools to carve me small. That truth burned hotter than his words on the phone. He thought tomorrow would finish me off. He didn't know me at all. The fire in my chest flared brighter, a ember turning to flame. I'd been asleep too long. Now I was waking up. The house quieted, its groans fading as if it held its breath. I smoothed the receipt flat on the table, stared at the ink until it blurred. Sophie's face swam up again, sharp and vivid from that company picnic. Had she been there, clinking glasses with him? I shook it off. It didn't matter who. It mattered that he'd planned this, mapped it out like a chess move, me the pawn he'd sacrifice. I closed the notebook, fingers lingering on its spine. Emily and Noah deserved a father who'd fight for them, not trade them away. I deserved more than a life as his footnote. I stood, legs steadier now, and dumped the untouched water down the sink. It swirled away, a small rebellion. Dawn broke fuller outside, light clawing through the dark. I wasn't ready to face him, not without armor. But I'd forge it. James thought he'd win tomorrow. He'd see. I was just getting started. Morning slammed into me like a door thrown open. I'd barely closed my eyes. The notebook from last night still sprawled across the kitchen table, its pages jagged with my scrawled defiance. Emily and Noah shuffled downstairs, rubbing sleep from their faces, their voices tugging me back to the present. I spooned cereal into bowls, tied Emily's hair with fumbling hands, forced a smile that felt like a mask. Routine was my rope, pulling me through the quicksand of James's words. Fine, tomorrow I'll kick her out of the house. Today was that tomorrow, and he didn't know I'd heard him carving my life apart. I waved the kids onto the school bus, their small hands slipping from mine, then drove to Lily's bakery downtown. I needed her steel, her unyielding light. Alone I'd shatter. The bell clanged as I pushed through the door, the air thick with yeast and sugar, a warmth that clashed with the cold knot inside me. Lily stood behind the counter, her apron streaked with flour, her dark eyes locking onto mine before I could speak. I slid the receipt across the wood, its creases worn from my restless grip. "He's leaving me," I said, my voice steady as a tightrope walker's step. She snatched it up, her lips thinning as she read. "You're kidding," she snapped, her words cutting sharp through the bakery's hum. "That bastard's been playing you." I took the coffee she thrust my way, its bitterness grounding me. "I know," I said, quiet but firm. "I need help." She jerked her head toward a man at a corner table. "Ethan," she said, introducing him as he stood, all weathered lines and quiet weight, his leather jacket creaking like it held secrets. He met my gaze, nodded once. "I've seen uglier messes. We'll dig," he said, his voice rough as gravel under boots. I left Emily and Noah with Lily after school, her promise to let them roll dough easing the ache in my ribs. Back home, I climbed the attic stairs, dust swirling in the dim light like ghosts of forgotten days. I found my paintbrushes in a cracked box, their handles worn smooth by hands I barely remembered. Downstairs, I dragged an easel into the living room, the canvas glaring blank and bold. I dipped a brush in red, slashed it across the white, a wound opening under my fingers. Rage poured out, raw and jagged. Blue followed, deep and cold, tracing the truth I'd uncovered. Each stroke ripped away the Grace he'd molded, the one who'd faded to fit his shadow. I was no longer that woman. I was a tempest spilling onto the cloth, my edges sharp and unapologetic, clawing my way back to life. Ethan's call sliced through the stillness that night, the kids asleep, the house heavy around me. I grabbed the phone mid-ring, paint still smeared on my knuckles. "He's not just cheating," he said, his words dropping like stones into a well. "He's stealing, company funds, offshore accounts." My breath caught, a spark igniting in my chest, wildfire racing through dry grass. I sank onto the couch, clutching the receiver. "How much?" I asked, my voice a thread stretched thin. "Enough to lock him up," Ethan said. "Tens of thousands, maybe more. I've got bank logs, photos of him with her." I shut my eyes, saw James at his desk, his smug grin, his hands stacking lies I'd never questioned. He wasn't just abandoning me. He was stripping me bare, pawning my trust for his escape. The canvas loomed across the room, red seeping into blue, a map of the wreckage he'd left. I could end him with this, watch him fall. But Emily's curls, Noah's plane, flashed behind my lids, soft and fragile. "What now?" I whispered, teetering on a razor's edge. "You decide," Ethan said. "I'll find more." I dropped the phone, its thud muffled by the rug. The walls pressed closer, thick with secrets I couldn't outrun. I climbed the stairs, slipped into the kids' rooms. Emily clutched her pillow, Noah's plane teetered on his blanket's edge. Their peace twisted a knife in me. They deserved better than a father who'd sold them out. Back downstairs, I grabbed black paint, smeared it thick across the canvas, its weight sinking into my bones. My hand trembled, but I kept going, each mark a vow. James thought he'd outsmarted me, left me empty-handed. He didn't know I held a torch, its flame licking at his carefully built lies. But the kids' laughter from this morning echoed, a chain holding me back. I needed proof solid enough to shield them, not just burn him. Lily's call woke me the next morning, her voice cutting through my haze. "Get over here with the kids," she said. "They're begging for more dough time." I agreed, craving her steadiness, the refuge of her chaos. When I arrived, the bakery buzzed, flour drifting like a gentle snow. Emily squealed as Noah smeared frosting on her nose, their joy piercing the storm in my chest. I kneaded dough beside Lily, her shoulder brushing mine, a silent anchor. Ethan slid a folder across the counter, his eyes steady as steel. "First round of dirt," he muttered. I tucked it into my bag, its bulk a quiet thunder against my hip, a weapon I hadn't unleashed. I laughed with the kids, the sound brittle but alive, rising above the roar inside. James thought today was his checkmate. He was wrong. I was forging a blade, and he'd feel its edge soon enough. Days melted into a fog after Ethan handed me that folder. I stashed it beneath a pile of sweaters in my closet, its presence a low hum beneath my skin, a coiled snake waiting to strike. Emily and Noah moved through the house like sunlight, their laughter bouncing off walls I could barely hold steady. I flipped pancakes, knotted Noah's shoelaces, tucked them in with stories of brave nights. Each task a thread stitching my unraveling edges. James floated through, his tie crooked, his gaze skimming over me like I was a ghost he'd already dismissed. He thought I was blind. He thought any day now he'd sweep me out with a flick of his wrist. I let him keep that illusion. I was honing a blade in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to cut. It struck on a Wednesday evening, rain drumming the roof, the air heavy with damp earth. He lounged on the couch, scrolling his phone, his confidence a crown he wore too carelessly. I stood in the doorway, the folder a live wire in my hands, my heart thudding like a trapped bird. "We need to talk," I said, my voice stretched thin but unyielding, a bowstring pulled tight. He glanced up, smirking. a king indulging a fool. I crossed the room, dropped the evidence onto the coffee table. Photos spilled out, Sophie's face glaring beside his. Bank logs fluttered, numbers bleeding red. His smirk dissolved, eyes widening as he scrambled to his feet. "What the hell is this?" he snarled, his voice cracking like thin ice underfoot. "You explain it," I said, arms crossed, my stance rooted as stone carved from a mountain. "Think you're clever?" he roared, stepping close, his breath hot with panic masked as rage. "You're nothing without me." I held his stare, my own eyes cold as frost on glass. "I was," I said, each word a pebble dropped into still water. "Not anymore," he faltered, hands clawing through his hair, his threats spilling like broken glass. "I'll take the kids. I'll ruin you," he spat. I didn't flinch. His words glanced off me, dull against the armor I'd built. He didn't feel the shift, the tremor under his feet as his empire tilted. I turned, walked out, leaving him to choke on the debris of his crumbling throne. Lily's voice rang in my ears the next morning, sharp over the clatter of her bakery. "Strike now," she urged, shoving a coffee into my hands, her resolve afire warming my bones. I met Ethan at a diner off Main Street, the folder a heavy pulse between us. "This enough?" I asked, my fingers brushing its worn edge. "More than," he said, sliding a new photo across the chipped table, James shaking hands with a stranger in a dark suit. "Her brother's dirty, fraud ties. You've got him." I exhaled, the pieces snapping tight. Harper came next, a lawyer Lily vouched for, her office a bunker of leather and steel. She flipped through the files, her gaze cutting like a scalpel. "Custody's yours. We'll lock his accounts by noon," she said, her voice a hammer forging my path. We filed that day, papers signed in ink dark as blood, chains snapping shut around his world. Alone that night, the dam broke. The kids slept down the hall, the house a silent shell, and I crumbled. Tears poured, a river bursting its banks, soaking the sheets as I curled into a knot. I wasn't grieving him. I wept for the years I'd poured into a dream that never existed, a future where Emily and Noah had a father worth their trust. My sobs scraped raw, a howl I couldn't cage. Then a soft touch grazed my arm. Emily stood there, barefoot, her eyes glinting in the dark. "Mom?" she whispered, climbing beside me. I wrapped her close, her heartbeat a drum against my chest. "You're enough," she said, her small voice a lighthouse piercing my storm. I breathed her in, the shards of me knitting back, tougher than they'd been. James struck back 2 days later, claws out. Harper's call jolted me awake, her tone clipped as wire. "He's claiming neglect," she said. "Says you're unhinged, painting through the night, abandoning the kids." My gut twisted, a cold fist squeezing tight. I saw those nights, the easel my anchor, the kids safe in their beds while I fought my demons in color. He'd turned my refuge into a weapon, his lie slick as oil on water. "He'll take them!" I gasped, my voice splintering. Harper cut in, steady as rock. "Not a chance. I've got better." She'd unearthed a vein of gold, emails linking James to Sophie's brother, a fraud kingpin, money trails snaking through their hands. His accusation withered, a house of straw torched by truth. I stepped from the Willow Creek courthouse a week later, Emily and Noah beside me, their fingers laced in mine like roots holding me firm. The sky loomed dark, purple as a fresh bruise, rain streaking the air. Harper had gutted his case, the judge's ruling a thunderclap splitting my chains. James lingered on the steps, his glare a blade dulled by distance, his power leaking away like spilled ink. I didn't turn back. "Almost there," I murmured to the kids, my breath a cloud in the chill. The folder, the nights of fury and tears, the fight I'd waged, all forged this moment. He'd stacked his lies high. Why, thinking I'd buckle beneath them. I hadn't. I'd toppled his tower, stone by fragile stone, and walked free into a dawn I'd claimed as mine. Weeks flowed past the courthouse victory. swift as a river carving new banks. I uprooted us to a tight apartment in Maple Grove, a pocket of Willow Creek, where the air tasted cleaner, free from James's lingering stain. The walls loomed empty at first, their silence a canvas begging for life. I unpacked with Emily and Noah, their voices weaving through the clutter as we shoved books onto shelves and draped curtains over bare windows. Then I cracked open my paints, jars hauled from the attic, their colors dulled but pulsing beneath dusty lids. I swept sunflowers across Emily's wall, their petals blazing gold, a beacon against the gray. Stars flared over Noah's, sharp and silver, a constellation born from my hands. The brush moved sure and light, each stroke a root sinking deep, binding us to this space, a sanctuary sculpted from the rubble he'd left behind. I landed a job at a studio near the park, a narrow room with skylight spilling sun onto scarred tables. I taught there, guiding shaky hands to find their lines. Kids splattered paint with reckless joy. Adults unfurled slowly, their brushes trembling then bold. And I stood among them, my voice calm as a steady tide. The pay kept us fed, the lights on, but the work itself, the spark it lit in others, mended a fracture I'd carried too long. Life wasn't perfect. Noah woke some nights, his sobs soft for the old house, and Emily's questions about their father pierced like thorns I couldn't pluck. I pulled them close, murmured tales of strength, my embrace a bulwark against the ache. This was ours, a rhythm rough but true, a melody I'd crafted from silence. Ethan hovered near, a quiet current in my days. He appeared one evening as I locked the studio, his shadow falling long across the pavement, his jacket frayed at the cuffs. "Dinner sometime?" he asked, his voice low as dusk, eyes catching mine with a warmth I hadn't sought. I hesitated, my pulse flickering, a bird testing its wings after a storm. "Maybe," I said, my lips curving faint but honest, a door inching open I hadn't dared unlock. Lily threw a party that Saturday, dubbing it a fresh start revel, her bakery thick with the scent of caramel and chatter. She strung my paintings along the walls, their hues fierce against the brick. And I watched, breathless, as strangers lingered, their murmurs a soft wave washing over me. Those canvases held my rage, my grief. Now they stood tall, a testament to the woman I'd clawed my way back to. James sank into the distance, his trial a faint echo I barely heeded. Harper's call cut through one morning, her tone brisk as a snapped twig. "He's done," she said. "Jail's certain. No deal." I pressed the phone to my ear, its chill a stark note against my skin, feeling only a whisper where fury once thundered. Ethan mentioned later, over coffee at Lily's, that Sophie had bolted, leaving James to rot alone. I didn't smirk. I didn't need his fall to stand. My triumph wasn't his cage. It was this, the walls I'd painted, the laughter ringing from my kids, the life I'd forged from his treachery's dust. The folder, the battles, the nights I'd bled color onto canvas, all carved this road. One I walked now with my chin lifted, my steps firm. Then the spark flared, a twist I hadn't glimpsed. At Lily's party, a woman wove through the crowd, her silver hair swept back, her gaze piercing as a hawk's talon. She stopped before my paintings, her head tilting, fingers hovering over the frames like she could feel their pulse. "You made these?" she asked, her voice smooth as polished stone. I nodded, my tongue catching on a sudden knot. "I own a gallery downtown," she said, pressing a card into my palm, its weight crisp and real. "Solo show. Next month. Call tomorrow." I stared at it, her name stark in black ink, a lantern igniting a dream I'd buried under his scorn. Art school hopes, crushed beneath years of his shrugs, roared back, a fire I'd starved now blazing. I slipped it into my pocket, my heart pounding a fierce rhythm, whispering, "One more leap." He'd never seen this spark, never dreamed I'd climb this high. I'd show him, not with spite, but with every line I dared to draw. The next morning, I drove Emily and Noah to Pine Hill, a ridge beyond town where the wind sang wild and free. We launched kites, their tails snapping against a sky vast and blue, strings taut in our grip. Emily darted ahead, her laughter a bright thread through the gusts, Noah chasing, his kite swooping, then climbing. I stood rooted, the earth cool under my soles, my hair whipping loose like a flag unfurled. The horizon rolled out, unbroken, a canvas cleansed of his mark, shimmering with what could be. I inhaled, the air sharp with grass and freedom, the burden of years peeling away like paint flaking from old wood. James had aimed to blot me out, to script my end. He'd lost. I'd seized the pen, redrawn my world in colors he'd never grasp. I glanced at the kids, their cheeks rosy with wind, then felt the card's edge in my pocket, its promise humming loud within me. Life stretched ahead, unfinished, alive. Ethan's offer lingered, a bridge I might cross, and the show loomed, a summit I'd claim. I'd walked through his inferno, bare and unbowed, to reach this dawn. My story wasn't his betrayal now. It was this, a tapestry I'd woven with my own hands, vivid and fearless and mine. I smiled, steady and full, and let the wind sweep me onward, one bold stroke into whatever lay beyond. Looking back, I see life bends you until you push back. James tried to blot me out, but I seized the brush and redrew my story. It hurt. Nights tore me open, doubts gnawed raw. Yet Emily, Noah, my friends, my art, they stitched me whole. His blade cut deep, left scars I still trace, but it cracked a door for light to flood in. Now I stand stronger, remade. Proof your worth isn't theirs to give. You claim it. That's my truth. What's yours? Ever faced a shadow that tried to swallow you? How did you break free? Share your scars, your wins, below. Let's lift each other. This isn't farewell. I'll return, maybe with paint-stained hands from that gallery show. For now, I'm on Pine Hill, kites soaring, the wind whispering my name. Keep chasing your dawn.